What bass pretty much defined metal bass and rock bass sounds up until this day, and whose shadow we're still living under? Let's find out. Metal Bass Monday. Before we get started this week, thanks for the new people that I've been getting messages from and have shown interest in the channel and everything. And if you're new to it, please like, subscribe, share, smash the like button, as I guess is the new term. And yeah, I appreciate everybody jumping on and looking forward to some new subscribers. And if you want some more content, especially what we've got coming up that's going to be linked to this week's episode, I'd appreciate the support on the Patreon and Subscribestar networks. Links down below. So, channel update, and speaking of some of the stuff for the Patreon channels, last week I mentioned the episode I'm going to put up about how to tone match and duplicate other people's sounds and analyze them as well, and we were going to focus on Eddie Jackson from Queensryche. It's a couple days behind, but that's coming up this week. I had a couple full mix examples that are having a couple copyright concerns, so I'm having to edit those parts out, and those will probably slide over into the Patreon version. So if you want to get that stuff, that's going to be up there. And as always, thank you very much to all my patrons. I hope you enjoy the companion episode that'll be just for you guys, and that'll be up here shortly as soon as I can get all that run down for you. Now, also along with that, I'm hoping that you guys will give me feedback again. You've always been great with it, and I've gotten a lot of ideas and helped shape the channel and where it's gone from the things that you have mentioned that you want to see. So with that in mind, as you know, if you follow the channel, I'm going to be doing a full production series, and that's going to be rolling out here as I can get a good chunk of that filmed ahead of time and put it on a regular schedule. And patrons will be getting a lot more of the behind the scenes and expanded info on that. But I'd also like to find out what new content you'd like to see outside of that the most. I've gotten some more requests after the last bass lesson thing I did for some things on technique and things. Specific techniques or jams or transcriptions or solos, or let me know what you'd like to see and hit me up in the comments and let me know. I'm kind of formulating the next couple of months up until the coming year on what I'm going to start scheduling and putting out for everybody, and I usually like to try and plan it out a little bit and give it as much thought and make it as the best quality I can and try and fit in what I think everybody wants to see. So I always value your input. Hit me up down there and let me know what you'd like to see coming up. So that's going to do it for the updates. Let's get into the subject at hand. On a side note, if you haven't checked it out already, I did a series with Alfie from the channel Witch Bass, and we covered the entire history of hard rock and metal bass, starting from the beginnings of the style all the way through to current day, from gear to style to technique to everything else. And I feel like we did a pretty good job at it. So if you haven't checked it out, I'm also going to link to that. And I think it's very cool. Give us some feedback on what you thought about it, and some of what we're going to go into here is going to tie into that. Now, doing that series and the exploration into Eddie Jackson's tone, it kind of reminded me of something. I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about it on this week's episode. A lot of metal and hard rock and just kind of the modern aggressive tone really kind of hit its mark at a certain point, and I think that one bass really kind of defined it, and we're still living in its shadow, and what was created with it kind of defines a lot of what we think of as kind of the core of what we're after with our sound. And I think a lot of time it's important to go back and understand where something came from, and you really realize how much of an effect it had, and it also gives you an understanding of what you might actually be looking for in your sound. And you go back to the core and you see the elements of what makes that sound so important, and that can affect your buying choices or how you mold your tone. So, what is this magic bass that affected everything, and probably a lot more than you realize? That is the Spector and S2. When Spector first came out, it really was unlike anything else. It looked different, it sounded different, and it had a profound effect on everything else. Spector really kind of made its name during an era when there was the boutique bass explosion. There were brands like Zahn and Tobias and Ken Smith and Federa. All of them kind of rose to prominence in a certain era. And a lot of those basses, though, were really popular with fusion guys, jazz. You had guys like Jimmy Hayslip from the Yellow Jackets and John Patitucci. And, you know, a lot of these things weren't geared towards rock. Spector, however, had a much more rock and aggressive tone, and it was adopted immediately. When they came out, I mean, just everybody had one, and people don't realize how often even players that were endorsed with other instruments were actually using these basses in the studio. And, I mean, it really has kind of come to define not only the way modern metal basses are approached as far as their building, the materials used in them, but how the tone is focused. The real big details on the NS2 that made it especially interesting were, one, it was all maple. So they were really trying to gear it towards an incredibly bright, defined sound. And that's really what, you know, modern metal bass is always after. You hear all the different descriptors of tone, clank, dangle even, all these things trying to describe this really metallic upper edge ring that cuts through a mix and makes this incredibly aggressive sound. And that's what Spector basically almost invented to a certain degree in just a one-stop shop of where to grab it. The other piece to really notice about this is that it defined a pickup combination that also became incredibly defining, and that was the EMG P&J set. This combination is, again, it's kind of a one-stop shop, can't fail, aggressive tone. Those on top of being an incredibly bright instrument is what gave them 90% of this tone that you're probably hearing on a lot of records and don't even realize it. The final touch to this is the original NS2s had something called a HasLab preamp in it. And it gave a really interesting character to the EMGs, almost a distorted effect. Not distorted, but those type of overtones to it. And added a real grind that accented and complemented the high-end type of ring that the EMGs are known for and that the Spector bass is kind of enhanced. But even all the other details and the playability of it and everything, much slimmer necks than were really common then. They tended to have this very, I guess what you would call a fast neck, very slim, a smaller nut width than what you might find on a precision-based things, much closer to a jazz, kind of a compromise in between the two of them, but a very slim neck, built for fast playing, very standout soloist, aggressive type of sound. And this thing was adopted, and it's all over mid-80s records. Metal and rock, most of the studio stuff that you hear a lot of times is a Spector, even if the guy doesn't play them live. But when you look at players that people still try and emulate their tone, like Eddie Jackson, that was all the original NS2s. He was a big Spector user. You had guys like Dave Ellefson, who even played NS2s and Spectors in the studio. Then a lot of people don't know that even on Dream Theater's Images and Words, John Myung used an NS2 in the studio for a lot of the parts he could get away with on a 4-string because it just sounded that good. So you look at those pieces and those items put together, and you can kind of see where almost all modern bass is still emulating it. Spector is still highly, thought of and that kind of thing. I mean, most death metal anymore, I see Spector everywhere. I mean, not to mention, someone like Alex Webster or something, but the majority of technical death metal guys I see, stuff like that, Spector is everywhere, and you hardly ever hear a bad word about it. And I think it's mostly because so many brands are still emulating the footprint that Spector put out. Later on, they moved into other pickup combinations. They've even started offering other combinations from like Nordstrand or Aguilar and stuff like that. But the real core Spector sound has always been the EMG pickups even if now they, you can get them with like DC sets instead of the P&J and things like that. But the real core and what most people think of as the classic Spector sound is still the P&J, straight out, HasLab preamp, and it's a simple combination that just absolutely became the defining sound of rock and metal. When you buy a lot of the basses aimed at metal, I can hear the legacy of that tone in it, that people are still kind of borrowing and biting from it. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is that not only is it kind of honoring something that we're all still emulating and biting off of, but to kind of show that there's a very simple piece behind things, and if you want to carve out your sound, that understanding the simple elements that went into the NS2, although they refined it into an incredibly well-crafted bass, you can get those elements, and it's not that hard. People do so much tone chasing, and it's a couple of simple elements. You get a good sounding foundation. You can get like a precision body and a maple neck, something fairly bright sounding, and slap a set of those EMG, P, and J in it, and you're 90% of the way there. That combo's been used everywhere, and it's going to get you most of that sound. So when you're looking at basses, you're looking at all these options and everything, knowing where this came from and that you're basically buying something built on that foundation, to me, I would almost argue that for modern metal bassists, Spector is to what we expect from an instrument in its tone, what Fender was for a long time for most rock players. The classic precision sound, that kind of thing. This was the leveling up and the piece of all those different elements. Now, people know I play a lot of Schecter basses. And I used to play Spector for a long time, and when I moved to Schecter, that was one of the things that attracted me, is they had a lot of the same elements, but with a lot more options. My 5-string Riot bass that you've seen me play, very slim neck, very bright ash body, maple neck, and it has the EMGs in it. It's a different series, it's the CS series, but it is a P&J set in it. A lot of these things are, classics that still affect all these modern instruments. Now, on the other side of that, you can see people even like Peter Baltus from Accept, who had, a really, go back and listen to Balls to the Wall or something like that. A really aggressive sound he still uses to this day. The dude was playing a Fender Squier bass with the EMGs in it. Simple. He wasn't even using, a higher end Fender bass. But that magic combination with a good resonant bass got him most of the way there. So you don't have to go nuts with a lot of these things. And when you're looking at so many boutique instruments and all these things, that's great. Run after those things, but know where it's coming from and that the rest is just gravy. Those essential components are what we're still chasing. And it's not that complicated. The NS2 set the mark for it, and it's not that hard to achieve. So we really owe a lot to Spector and what they created there, because it's still defining to this day. I find it especially proves the point that one of the few things that seem to kind of survive and make the move from like 80s metal or thrash and speed metal and things like that was the Spector bass when the movement to grunge came. One of the most respected bass sounds that at least I've had comments about or people ask me about was Mike Starr from Alice in Chains' sound on the Facelift album. He had a great tone. Spector NS2 into an Ampeg. That was it. That was his whole sound. Him and Eddie Jackson have incredibly close sounds to each other, and it's because of that bass, and it just doesn't need a lot of extra to make it happen. So it's really well worth going back and looking at it, understanding that, and then viewing what you're building or what you may want out of your new bass, knowing what you're really kind of emulating, because it all goes back to that heritage. So it really simplifies things. And we owe a debt of gratitude to the Spector for kind of setting that mark that we're all still kind of building on. Do you know other players, or have you been inspired by players that have used the Spector or the EMG PJ in a bass that's kind of emulating that tone? What ones, kind of really hit for you? Let me know in the comments and tell me what you thought of those instruments, and what are your thoughts? Who do you think is defining, if not Spector, the modern metal bass sound? I would bet, even if you disagree that it's Spector at this point, that they're probably building off that legacy. Like I said, I still see them everywhere, and it's hard for me to go through more than a couple of metal bands to either not see a Spector or hear something that's imitating that sound. I think the thing in the end that really cements Spector as kind of the godfather of all this metal gear is the fact that it hasn't gone out of fashion. You can think of somebody really modern and influential, like, say, Dingwall. They've crossed into a number of different genres, but they're still really popular with metal, and they have an incredibly distinct sound that you can hear right away, and you hear a lot. And not slamming Dingwall, but I hear a lot of players now, though, that are starting to kind of shy away or say that, it's becoming a bit too much, or starting to explore other options. Maybe it's just internet bitching, who knows. But that never really seemed to happen with Spector. I never heard somebody go, oh, I'm so tired of the Spector sound, or, we want something different, or everybody sounds the same because of it now. Not saying that all Dingwall players sound the same, but, you hear a bit of that here and there with Dingwall, or say like Dark Glass Gear or something like that. I think it has a lot more to do with people keep dialing in the same tone rather than trying to carve their own. But I never really saw that happen with Spector, so that's why I still give them, kind of that timeless thing that we're all still kind of running after to one degree or another. There's that influence. So I wanted to pay a little homage, talk a little history, and remind you that keeping in mind what we're all really after with this stuff, it doesn't take so much. You can even put together a parts base from Warmoth, keeping the construction ideas of a Spector in mind, and probably come up with a great bass that's going to kill for modern or classic metal or just hard rock. Because, they set out all the elements that seem to be what most of us are after. Hit me up, let me know your thoughts on that. I think it's an interesting discussion and something that I really had time to reflect on, working on this stuff with Eddie Jackson and listening to his raw files, and then remembering how many players really use this stuff on the road and in the studio, even if they had endorsements with other companies or things. I have pictures or have seen video and things of them using this stuff in the studio. So that's going to do it for this Monday. I'll see you on the tone matching thing, where we can dive into Eddie Jackson a little bit. And I've got some raw tracks so we can really hear that Spector sound and get a little deeper on it. And I'll look forward to seeing your comments down below. Should be an interesting conversation. That's going to do it for this week. I'll see you on the next one.